trig inverses. We know that sine 30 equals 1/2, and that, our calculator will tell us. It's one of those angle values that we have memorized at this point. But the setup, sine 30 equals 1/2, is that setup of function angle equals ratio. And so if you have a function sine and an angle 30, you can find out the ratio of the opposite and hypotenuse side is 1/2. So sine 30 degrees is 1/2. Sine of 90 degrees we know is 1. And a couple other ones. Sine 45 degrees we know is rad 2 over 2, and so on. But an inverse is when we have arc sine. Now, arc sine on our calculator, we don't have it doesn't say arc, it has sine with the -1, and we know a -1 exponent, it's not an exponent, it's the symbol for inverse. And we've seen that when we had function notation, that we had stuff that were f of x, and then the inverse was f inverse of x. It looks like a -1 exponent, but it's the symbol for inverse. And it's the same thing your calculator does there. When you see on your calculator the, sine, cosine, and tangent, above those, like if you hit second sine, you see the sine with the -1. That's talking about the inverse function of sine. And we use arc sine, to call it that too. So you see here that arc sine of 1/2 equals 30. That we know function angle equals 30, like sine 30 is 1/2. Well, inverse function, or I should stick with the word arc, so let me do that. I'm going to say that arc function ratio equals angle. So if you have the function and the angle, you could find the ratio. If you have the function and the ratio, you just have to do the inverse of the function to find the angle. So function angle equals ratio, arc function ratio equals angle. And so we'll see this in some problems, like arc cos negative rad 3 over 2 equals x. And so we have the function cosine, the ratio, negative rad 3 over 2. What we're looking for is the angle measurement. And this can be in radians, degrees, whatever. So one way to kind of think of arc cosine is you could kind of ask yourself, this kind of means at what angle is cosine negative rad 3 over 2? That's really what this is asking. What angle measure of cosine is negative rad 3 over 2? Now, first of all, I see that as negative. And so the fact that cosine is negative, we know from our all students take calculus that if cosine is negative, it's got to be either in the second or third quadrant. So that's what we're talking about. And then we look familiar that this rad 3 over 2 is a very familiar ratio. And think, up here, remember that sine 30 is 1/2. So then remember, wait a minute, cosine 30 is rad 3 over 2. But I'm looking quadrants 2 or 3, so I'm looking what is the reference angle for 30 in those quadrants. And the answer for quadrant 2 is 150 degrees, because 180 minus 150 in quadrant 2 would give you 30 degrees, and so it would be negative cosine 30 degrees, which would be negative rad 3 over 2. And it's also negative in quadrant 3, which is your angle minus 180, or in this case, your angle plus 180. So it's going to be 180 plus 30 is 210. So cosine is negative rad 3 over 2 at 150 and 210. And I can type that into my calculator, and I'll see that I do get negative. I'll get a decimal, but it's equal to negative rad 3 divided by 2 at those angle measurements. And let's just look at this one more example. Sine of arc cosine 5 over 13. And so again, you need to think of this as, at what angle is cosine 5 over 13? And your calculator can do this stuff for you too. That at what angle is cosine 5 over 13? Well, let's say inverse of cosine 5 over 13. So second cosine 5 divided by 13 we're getting 67.3801, so on. Well, I want to know the sign of that. So sign of that value, and I don't want to type that decimal. If you remember how to do this on your calculator, if you do, second, and then the minus sign, it gives you the answer. So sign of my previous answer is a decimal, but let's see if we do math, enter, enter, we're getting 12 over 13.